Okay, so a new study out of Denmark finds that transgender individuals have significantly higher rates of suicide attempts. Now, I saw this morning and I thought, okay, they're going to use this to assert that trans kids have a higher risk of suicide if they are not affirmed.
Who's they?
Trans rights activists, we'll call them TRAs.
And the
Because
media.
as soon as and the media, yeah. Because what this shows is that transgender individuals do have a higher rate of suicide attempts and sometimes successful, that's not the right word, completed suicides. Successful, clear. Anyway.
Well, it was a success for them.
No.
Right?
Okay. Completed, I guess.
Well, suicide doesn't actually occur unless it's completed.
Yes.
Right?
Let's not discuss.
You can't have
this
like half a
any further.
suicide.
Okay. I don't want to use words that are not sensitive to this, but I think that as soon as I saw this, I thought, okay, here comes the rhetoric around it's your fault if you don't affirm them because there's a higher risk of suicide. So that is our social fault. What I think, though, is that, and I'm going to show you this data, that this shows the opposite. It shows that people who do transition and are affirmed have a higher risk of suicide, meaning that gender dysphoria and risk of suicide do not get mitigated if you transition, because the people this study was looking at were transitioned people. So affirmation does not mitigate the risk of suicide. Neither does affirmation mitigate the risk of gender dysphoria. Those things persist after, meaning transitioning doesn't help. What we do know does help is full puberty. Most research done since the 1970s shows that gender dysphoria resolves by adulthood. So if a child is allowed to complete puberty, that often heals gender dysphoria in between 80 and 90%. Transitioning does not. And if gender dysphoria does go away, the risk of suicide does too, by that logic, right? By transitive property, transitioning a child increases the risk of suicide. Let's look at the data, because as Abigail Schreier points out, this risk of suicide is like a loaded gun. The data here shows, now you look at the transgender individuals on the left, non-transgender on the right, and then I've circled the relative risk. So it shows that there's about a 7.7 times higher incident rate ratio of suicide attempts. It does show that males have a higher likelihood of this than females, which shows biological difference. And it tracks with historical data showing that gender dysphoria is more common among males than females. But take a look at how it also shows a declining rate of suicide also. It shows that this is happening much less now than it did in the 80s. Is that because trans people are actually not persecuted like they tell us that they are in society? Or were they once and they're not? That's a real possibility. But the data does not show an increased risk like we are presented in the media. In fact, it shows a mitigated risk. It does, though, show an overall risk of all-cause mortality, and that, I think, is more concerning than this declining rate of suicide. Take a look at this chart, and I know this looks awful, so I'm going to zoom in on that. I just want you to see what it is. Again, transgender youth on the left, and then non in the middle. What this is showing is the risk of being transgender to all causes of mortality, and it shows the overall risk of being transgender gives you this almost on average 2 times more likelihood of death from other things. What do you think those things are? I don't know. Could it be the medicalization of the body, the hormones and the surgeries that these people are being subjected to? Could it be related to the dependence on biopharmaceuticals? In fact, long-term studies done on transgender people do show that they die from a lot of these procedures. The media doesn't seem to be curious about this. They just want the talking point, the suicide talking point. They will only tout this risk of suicide as a reason that you should affirm a child's ideology, even though I'm pretty sure a critical eye would look at this and say, that's not true, actually. I don't think this shows that at all. Meanwhile, GLAAD, the lesbian and once gay and lesbian association, now it's really doesn't stand for gay rights. It stands mostly for transgender rights, published an open letter signed by all manner of celebrities to speak out on behalf of the medicalization of transgender bodies. They are calling on social media to stop people from sharing information that would indicate that gender-affirming healthcare harms trans youth. Here is the GLAAD campaign. It's to Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter, signed by these familiar faces and celebrities that you may recognize to get your attention. Here's what they're asking, saying we're calling on these 5 platforms to curb hate speech, shut down on accounts that perpetuate anti-LGBTQ extremist hate and disinformation, dehumanizing hateful attack on prominent transgender public figures, and anti-hate speech, including targeted misgendering, dead naming, and hate-driven tropes. They really want those things, misgendering, dead naming, which is using someone's birth-given name that they're not wanting to use anymore, and hate-given tropes. Here's the part that I think that we should be concerned about. They're asking for lawmakers to, who are pushing these, what they call anti-trans bills, to be gone after. And they said they also think that anyone who includes myths like LGBTQ people are grooming children. So if you post these things like I'm sure all of you have seen this on your social media of like people with their penises hanging out, walking down Pride streets with children around. My feed's been full of that in June. Have yours?
No, thankfully, my feed does not look anything like that. But I glance over at your feed sometimes, and I'm like, why are there like naked dudes walking around with little kids?
TikToks type stuff that I'm being shown as cautionary tales. I'm not seeking it out, honey.
I know. I'm just saying, I know the crazy stuff that flows through you on your
the websites you frequent.
Yeah, where are you going? But yeah, no, I mean, it's awful. And you're seeing like a little kid having to walk down a street as these naked men just kind of stand there and hang out. Like, this is normal.
People in, whatever violent dog looking strap things like twerking in front of children. They're saying that if you, promote these myths that children are being groomed, even with proof in the form of video, that you should be deplatformed. It also says that if you say that gender affirming healthcare harms trans people, well, I say that a lot because I'm very concerned about the medicalization of these drugs and the side effects and these surgeries. And I would only assume that that would mean that they would have to deplatform detransitioners, such as Chloe Cole. We've talked about her before. She has shared many ways in which her body was harmed by transgender surgeries and cross-sex hormones. It caused her a lot of pain and possibly infertility, and also the inability to ever have meaningful sexual relations, because most of these drugs mean that you can never have an orgasm, which means you can never have any kind of fulfilling sexual encounters at all. This is Layla James. Earlier this year, she began a lawsuit against Kaiser Permanente in California for removing her breasts at the age of 13. Here's the news about that is that they just put her straight on the drugs and the surgery. 13-year-old girl. I mean, your boobs are not even all the way in at 13 to, do that to someone. The GLAAD campaign would like nothing more than for these stories to be disallowed and deplatformed. Some of the signers on this petition include Cynthia Nixon from Sex and the City, who, if you're watching that reboot of Sex and the City, has a non-binary lover in the show. So I guess she's all about that. Zooey Deschanel, Alyssa Milano, Deborah Messing, Elliot Page, of course, Camila Cabello, Demi Lovato, who was a they, them, and is now not, I think, Ariana Grande, and the transgender version of Kim Kardashian, because that person is famous for being famous, is Dylan Mulvaney, also signed. Here is the tagline on that campaign. They say, "True allies do not profit from anti-LGBTQ hate," which I think is rich, literally, because when you bring up the idea of profit, who's profiting from this ideology? It's not people who bring up these things, that bring up concerns. It's the biopharmaceutical companies and the social media companies. But okay, pretend that other people are profiting from cautionary warnings. All right. So let us know what you think of that in the chat.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.